Welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast. This is an Author's Tuesday episode. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a great author, Suzanne Scott, who's I'm really happy to say I found her work when I did, because it's all around from being kind of stuck as a parent and going going more towards love and different ways and tools you can use when you're a parent. We all need that as parents. I'm so grateful for you, Suzanne, to bring this topic to me today to the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me. I love coming on.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll probably start the
Delighted
the
to be
show
here.
off. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. And we'll probably start off the show. We wouldn't mind telling the listeners a bit of background about yourself and the great work you do. Obviously with your book and the workshop I had the pleasure of being on.
Yeah, no problem. And as I was saying, I always find it funny when people call me an author because it's very much not what I think of myself. It's not where I started and it's not where I ever thought I'd end up. So I'm a parent and I've got two children of my own, one with special needs and she's autistic and she's profoundly deaf. And we struggled as parents for a long time with big meltdowns and um I was a hairdresser from Glasgow. That was what I did. And then we ended up becoming foster carers. And so we took in kids short term and lots of different things happened in our lives. And it was through that role as a foster carer that we ended up falling upon this very new way of parenting, that trauma-informed approach, which not many people seemed to know back then in 1980, 2018. And I just couldn't believe the difference that it made in our home with our foster child and with our own children, and really just felt we had to tell people. And we set up the charity, and we've been doing that for 7 years now, offering fully funded workshops across the country. And we've just recently put the content of that into a book as well, so that people can learn it in different ways. People learn differently, don't they? So it was just
Hmm.
having that other way for people to access the information.
Yeah, no, it's
And
it's
that's what I do.
incredible. Yeah, no, it's really, really good because there's so much great nuggets. One that comes to mind is the way you kind of you explain the approach that you use. You might give the listeners a little bit about on the workshop you mentioned as well, where your child will come out of school and it'd be like, we're going the wrong way home, and you'd react to it before you learn this stuff, and it'd be like a big argument you'd have with your child, and then you were saying you might just explain that for people. I just think it's great the way you changed it, and it helps so much,
Yeah,
Suzanne.
yeah, I'll always tell that wee story. Yeah, the wee story that I tell in my workshop about that.
Yeah,
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 so normally I would get to go to school and my wee guy would come out very stressed. He was a child from trauma in foster care. And
yeah,
he would be very stressed. He'd get in the car and he'd argue with me. Every day he would say to me, why are we not going home the way we normally go home? And we went
mhm,
home the same way every day. And so I would
yeah,
get sucked into this argument. I would think it was an attack on me. And we would
mhm,
argue, and then the whole thing would escalate, and he'd be kicking the chair, and he'd be screaming and yelling, and I'd be putting on punishments and consequences. And we'd get home, and he'd be sent to his room, and I'd chase him up the stairs. And it's terrible that you treat me this way when I'm so good to you, and all of that would escalate. And so when I learned this approach of just stopping and taking a minute and seeing the fear, my fear and his fear, and breathing, I was able to go to the school, and when he would get in the car and say the same thing to me, I could just say, "Is it not? Is it not this? Is it not?" Because I knew that he was talking rubbish. By this time, I'd learned about the brain and I understood that his brain was offline and he wasn't actually thinking about what he was saying.
mhm,
And when I look back at it now, I know that he was actually triggered into a childhood trauma from long before. So that was him being triggered into the day where social work had to come and get him at school at the end of the day and tell him that he couldn't go home and that he couldn't be with his five siblings. And that's what he'd actually been talking about every single day. But I'd been taking it as an attack on me. And so just by not responding to it with stress and fear, he didn't escalate in the same way. And then I could stay calm and I started breathing and we got home and he still was upset and he still stormed off up the stairs, but I didn't chase him up the stairs. I just kept breathing and kept waiting. And eventually, when he came down much quicker, because they calm down quicker when you're not there adding more stress, then we could have these conversations and then we could talk about what had really happened and what was going on for him and what he could maybe do next time, what he could maybe do differently. and then we started making a plan for when these moments came up so that he had it's like almost like that fire, fire plan that you have in your work so that you know what you're going to do when the fire alarm goes off. So that when their fire alarm in their brain's going off, they know what's expected and they're not going to always do it, but we get to
Mhm.
practice it every time in the cam. And the more we practiced it in the cam, the more he was able to do it differently in these worst moments.
Yeah,
So it
no,
was
it's
actually taking
incredible.
these really,
Yeah.
really difficult moments into and turning them into a teaching moment.
Mm. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the breathing as well because I've used that myself with my own son, and it works a treat. Really good. Do you want to talk a bit more about that? Because I just think it's great. Like, where you're sitting, you're saying to them, okay, join in with me in my breathing, and even if they don't, you're really kind of helping
Yeah.
them, aren't you?
Yeah, who would have thought that something so simple would be so transformational? Yeah, so when we breathe, we release oxytocin in our brain, which is the love hormone, which calms our nervous system and brings our brain online. Because when we've gone into fear along with our kids, our thinking brain's gone offline as well. We're stressed, we're scared, we're in that overthinking. And so just by me not saying anything and not doing anything and breathing near my child releases that same oxytocin in their brain. They don't have to even do the breathing for that to happen. Obviously that's your goal would be that they would maybe do some breathing too. But you can't get a stressed, overwhelmed child to stop and breathe when they're in meltdown or they're in big behavior.
Yeah, yeah.
But you doing it will have a knock-on effect. And we're supposed to have learned this as children ourselves, being around regulated adults, but very, very few people I've ever met had calm, regulated adults in their lives. Everyone was stressed and overwhelmed, like my parents.
Yeah.
And so we haven't been teaching it to our children because we're all stressed and we're overwhelmed ourselves. So it's about us starting
Yeah.
to learn how to do that first before we do anything else.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, really, really good. And so effective, so effective. I suppose the million-dollar question really is for me as well. So the people, families haven't known about this stuff, and I certainly haven't. So what's the first step you can take to transform the way you're kind of managing your child's stress and maybe not stress, but the way they're feeling and getting emotional. What's the first step you can take to turn the corner with this?
Yeah, well, for me, it was really learning that my child wasn't choosing it.
Yeah.
Because as long as we see a child doing this to us on purpose,
Mm.
we're under attack and we go into defense. And then we shut down and they've shut down, and there's no relationship in that moment. And so for me, when I started to learn about neuroscience and all this stuff, which blew my mind to learn that my child wasn't actually choosing this, because we were told
Mm.
we were choosing it, weren't we, all of our childhood?
Yeah.
And that we actually hadn't been choosing it either. And
Hmm.
that in itself was transformational for me to have compassion for myself as a child, so that I could have compassion for my child in front of me.
Mm.
That they're not choosing it, that doesn't make it okay. They're not choosing it in that moment because their brain's offline. And so if I can change that lens and I can just see a stressed, scared, overwhelmed child instead of a child that's doing this to me on purpose, then I'm going to feel very differently towards that child. And I might not be able to do it in the moment because it's hard when it's
Mm.
all kicking off. But
Yeah.
even afterwards, coming back at it and thinking about it and looking at it and saying, well, do you know what? If they weren't choosing that, then I can see that very differently. And then I can come back and repair it. It's about just dialing it down, just seeing it from different and getting really good at the repair.
Mm.
Because if we're not repairing, then we're not teaching our children rupture and repair cycles. And if you think about any successful relationship, there's constant rupture and repair in that relationship. That's how it stays
Mm.
successful. Nobody
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
argue, nobody doesn't get annoyed. But if
Yeah.
we've grown
Yeah.
up in families that never taught us that, either they were always in rupture, never repairing, or we were all perfect, we all had to be happy and smiley and good little girls and boys and never made any fuss because everyone had to be happy all the time, then we didn't learn it there either. So, but we
Mm.
need to teach that. That's part of that's human development. That's what creates successful relationships. So really the
Yeah.
seeing the fear and then getting good at the repair, I think is good places to start.
Yeah, repair is so important. Yeah, that's really good. And I suppose as well, a question I was thinking of earlier, like your book is brilliant the way it's really very well explained and easy to read. So definitely all the listeners, people watching YouTube, make sure you get a copy of it. It's really, really good. I'll share the link on the show notes as well. But the question I was kind of thinking of earlier, like when there's a man and obviously when like there's a couple in a relationship, like, and one person knows this and has learned this, and you know how would you kind of explain it to your spouse? How would you kind of say, okay, because they're dead set, like this is the way to do it. Like, don't tell me you can't, I can't do that. What way would you kind of approach that?
Yeah, that's a
If
hard
that
one,
makes
isn't it?
sense.
And I'd say
Yeah.
that's one of our most asked questions. Is
Okay.
often the
Yeah.
women come to the workshops, not just the women, but mostly the women, and they say,
Mm.
"What about my partner? What about my husband? I can't get him to do it." But also, it works the other way as well. Um, and it is a there's no $1 million question, no answer to this question. I
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
actually done a podcast myself. We just started one recently, and my husband and I did a talk
Very
on
good.
it because
Yeah.
he was dead resistant. He was like,
Mm.
no way, no chance, because we were really comfortable with fear and control. It's all we knew. And
Yeah.
it's harder for guys, I think, when they came from that belief that men have to be tough. And most gay guys didn't they? That they couldn't cry and that they couldn't have emotion. That was a sign of weakness. So suddenly we're saying, allow emotion. Don't get upset. Just let the kids have emotion. And the men want to often come in and fix that and stop that and suppress that from that generational belief. And so I would say I had to do it with my husband just as much as I did it with my kids. I had to listen to him and I had to let him talk and tell me how he felt without me fixing and changing how he felt. Because often we jump in and we say, oh, no, 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 you're wrong, or don't be silly. So say something kicked off and I deal with it. And then I come downstairs and talk to him and he's saying, nah, but I don't get this. How can that be right? He was doing this and he was doing that. You can't just let that go. I'd jump in and I'd want to tell him and teach him and help him see differently, which
Mm.
doesn't work. So instead, I would come in and I have to listen to him and let him tell me how he feels and validate that how he feels because validating isn't the same as agreeing.
Mm.
I hear you. Yeah,
Very good.
that's really difficult. And that does feel, I can understand why you might think and feel that way. But then his brain starts to come online and then he's more open to understanding and listening to what I'm thinking and feeling. And
Wow.
then we can start to
Yeah.
have these conversations. But also, I mean, in the podcast, he talks about how he first thought this was just going to be a new thing I did for a week, gave it up, like everything else we tried over the years. And he said, yeah, okay, we'll try it. But what would happen was I would go up the stairs. My child would be meltdown. I'd be breathing and waiting till he was calm and I was calm. And I'd say to my husband, right, I'm going to go up and deal with this. And I'd go upstairs with this new idea that I was going to do this new stuff. And every time when I came down, I was saying, I can't believe what happened. I can't believe
Mm.
what he told me. I can't believe the stuff that I didn't know because he was starting to be able to tell me what was really underneath the behaviour, things I had no
Mm.
idea about. And then we were having these great healing conversations, and then the repair was happening, and it was lovely. And he couldn't help but see the change. So
Mm.
you kind of have to model it a bit. Do it yourself. Don't try
Yeah.
get them to.
Yeah.
Just you do it, and they'll start to see it, the change, and then you can't help but get on board once you see the difference that it can make.
Yeah, no, that's really well explained. Thanks so much for that. That's brilliant. And you made a really great point in the book as well, Suzanne, where you're talking about when you do this stuff and later on, just say you've got a kid that's about 7 or 8, and later on when they're teenagers, they won't be afraid to come to you when the big things happen. So I just think that's a really good point.
Yeah, yeah, because when they become teenagers, we get really scared, don't we? When we
Mm.
lose control almost because if we're bringing our children up with fear and control parenting, and can I just point out that I did use a fear and control parenting for 19 years, and I'm not saying that I didn't. I absolutely did.
Yeah, yeah.
And we tend to lose relationship when we use fear and control. When they get older than us and they get bigger than us, that's really scary and they tell us to F off and they go off out the door anyway, no matter what punishments and consequences we put in place. So then we use even more punishments and even more consequences, which just makes it worse. And teenagers listen to those who they feel understood by. And if it's not us, because we're using fear and control and the relationship's breaking down, then they're going to listen to their peers. which
Mm.
can get really scary because they all think they know everything and they don't. And they're
Yeah, yeah.
often gravitate towards kids very similar to them. And if you've got kids from trauma, then, they tend to all kind of band together and go and get up to all sorts. Not all of them, but it's often the way. But
Mm.
if they know that you understand them, and if you're working to create relationship and connection with them, then they're going to come to us for influence. They're going to want to hear what
Mm.
we have to say. Not always do what we want them to do, but they will listen to some of what we say. But if all I've done is tell my child that they're unacceptable to me in these emotions, then they're not going to want to come to me when they're having a hard time. And of course,
Mm.
that's what we want our children to do when they get older, don't we? When they're teenagers and struggling with all this stuff out there. We want them to come to us. So this is why this shift can make such a huge impact. But we tend to use more fear and control when we get scared, which just makes it worse.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and it makes so much sense because I had like my daughter the other day. Like I could see that when she's playing up, it's not because she's doing it on purpose. It's because she wants the attention. That's the. Oh, can you hear me? Because the attention, that's what they're
Yeah,
looking for is the attention. Like
yeah.
I just thought it
The
was really good when you were
connection.
explaining
Yeah, yeah.
explaining about that because you're thinking if you're not doing it on purpose, and it doesn't matter what kind of attention is it, even if they're shouting at them, you're still giving them attention, even though it's not good attention. Do you want to talk a bit about that? I think that's a really good point that you made.
Yeah, yeah, it's a key piece, isn't it? It's such an important piece. Yeah, so
Yeah,
understanding that children, when they're in big behavior, actually children all the time need connection to survive. So when we're
yeah,
born, we learn very early in life to be who our parents want us to be, to stay connected. We'll abandon our true authentic selves if we have to stay connected. And then when we need so we have stressed out parents who are disconnected from us unconsciously. They were all busy with their lives, aren't we? We're all stressed and they feel that. So they need connection, but we're too busy to give connection. So they go into behaviour and they get connection. And they'll keep doing
yeah,
that. That's that cycle that they stay in. So if we can learn to see that if we can just come in and offer some connection to that child, it doesn't need to be moments of connection and they get what they
yeah,
need and they don't need to create behaviour to get it. That's
mhm,
driving, actually, it's driving every behaviour. Every human behaviour is driven to get connection. You think about hitting, kicking, biting,
mhm,
spitting, it's a connection of type of
yeah,
connection.
mhm,
It's better than no connection. So of course we want to teach our children how to get healthy connection and healthy ways to ask
mhm,
for connection and
yeah,
us to see that they need that. But yeah, it's really about looking at the whole human model very differently, isn't it, from what we
yeah,
thought it
yeah,
was?
definitely.
Because we were all told
No.
we were attention seeking, but actually
Mm.
we were connection needing.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, it's like so much
Mm.
sense because you made a really you told a really good story that brought home for me when I heard it as well. When you were saying that your son went to a party and he wasn't quite ready for it, and he had an incident where he bit a child, and you were saying you kind of like you made a lot of sense where you said like you kind of feeling that I'd be judged when I go to collect them. Would you mind maybe just telling that story because it's really good?
Yeah,
Like
it's quite a long film.
it
I'll
it
try
bring
and
it
give you the
bring it
bullet
brings it
points.
home. Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
so I had gone to collect him, and as you normally do, you would come in saying, "Oh, don't you worry, this boy will be punished," because that was the expectation. But all the shame of what will everyone think of me? What will they say about me? All the judgment, all the shame, and all my triggers come up. And so my job is to breathe and to calm down and bring my brain back online so that I can remember that my child is not choosing this. Something has happened. Again, that doesn't make it okay to bite people. It's never okay to bite people. We're going to teach, but we don't,
yeah,
see, we often jump in and teach too quickly. We teach in the fear. Nobody learns then the fear. And so we had to get him to a place where he was calm and regulated, which I talk about obviously in the book and the workshop, how we do that. And it was in the calm that we could come back and ask him, what on earth happened today that you would get so stressed that this would happen? And then when you start getting curious and you start figuring out what's underneath, that's where you start to understand why it happened. Because he'd been to this overwhelming experience. It was too overwhelming for his very small, window of tolerance and his nervous system that was completely wired for stress. It didn't take much excitement and stress for his brain to shut down and for him to get triggered back into that old trauma. And so I could help him to see that. And then our goal was to teach him regulation skills so that when he goes to these events, he can cope. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
that's going to take a bit of practice, going to take a bit of time, me being there, me being able to connect with him and breathe. And he comes to me and he gets connection all through that part. Next time, the next party, I go along and I'm there and I help him to, come outside if he needs to and take a minute and shake off the stress and do all the tools and then come back in with that reset window of tolerance. So that eventually he doesn't need me to go along to these events because he can cope. But
Hmm.
people come back to me with story after story, and it never does ceases to amaze me. People, will email me and say, "Oh, we had this big problem at the school, and my son did this terrible thing." And the behavior itself is awful, but there's always something underneath. It will turn out that the child will have been getting bullied for months and they didn't know, or
Mm.
that, there's something specific was going on. And again, the child has to learn that that behavior is not acceptable. But you can't
Mm.
teach that until you know why the behavior is happening in the first place.
Yeah.
It's not just the changing of the behavior, it's the why is it happening? Because all the
Mm.
sensory stuff as well, some kids just really overstimulated by sound and movement and temperature and all that sensory stuff, the eight sensory pathways that are coming at us. If you can understand your child's sensory system, then you can reduce a lot of the stress for them and help them cope, and then build up that ability to cope with the stress because stress
Mm.
is always going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, because you remember you were saying instead of time out, you're giving time in. I love
Yeah,
that as well.
yeah,
When you said that.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But it's got to be the calm. We can't force that onto a stressed out child. So yeah,
No,
when
no.
afterwards when we're all calm, we'll come back together and have that time in. Yeah, absolutely. I'm here if you
Yeah.
need me. When you need me, come
Mm.
get me. All that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that because there's a lovely
No,
end to that story went into school and gave the child a bar of chocolate, wasn't it? Or I
yeah,
just thought that was
eventually
great.
yeah, he knew the natural consequences were that this child would not be his friend anymore. This tends
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
what happens, isn't it, when you bite people? And so
yeah,
he
yeah.
wrote a lovely note and he took it into the school and he gave I was really funny. He gave the boy this box of chocolates. They all got chocolates in class. And when he came home, he said to me, the wee boy said to him, "You can bite me anytime," which wasn't really the signal we were trying to send, but
I know. Yeah, I know.
here he learned how to repair. Yeah.
Mm,
And he never
yeah,
bit again. This was in primary three, and he's now finished fourth year and he's still not bitten anyone else. So that really wasn't
yeah.
about biting.
Mm,
It was about
yeah,
what
yeah,
what was going on for him that created us so much stress.
yeah.
But and the story, I mean, I'm not going to. You've got to, come to workshop. You'll find out what that was. But it was a
Yeah. Sorry.
huge
Yeah,
trauma trigger for him. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And could you maybe this is really great, Suzanne. Thanks a million for coming on. I was going to just ask you as well, just for a takeaway for people who are listening and watching, you just say you're dealing with a teenager, that can be a little bit more tricky, can't it? Like, what advice would you give in that respect,
Yeah, I mean, don't get a lot of questions about teenagers. Well, it is.
Mm.
We think it is. It's just tricky because they're bigger and we've got less. We've probably got less. We think we've got less control. Like I was saying, they get older. They don't have to do what we tell them. We can't use fear and control. If we can start doing this earlier, then we probably won't have as many issues when they're older.
Yeah. Hmm.
But with children with trauma, it can be really difficult when they've got, the brains are going into teenagehood and there's a lot of changes in the brain and they can struggle. Really, the best thing to do is work on your own calm because the minute
Hmm.
you get stressed out, you're going to make things worse. Just not
Yeah.
making it worse is a strategy in itself.
Hmm.
Just
Yeah.
reminding yourself that my child is having a hard time. They're not giving me a hard time.
Hmm.
I find those wee
Yeah.
mantras really help me in those worst
Yeah.
moments. Just and the attitude, we get the attitude from teenagers. And I
Yeah.
would get
Yeah.
so triggered by that attitude. And I still can, I'm only human. And they
Yeah.
roll their
Yeah.
eyes and they huff and they sigh and they scoff
Mm.
at me. And I would get really triggered and really shut down. I want to shut that down. And I just dumped a whole bunch of stress onto that. And if I
Yeah.
just say nothing and I just say, okay, I'm going to walk the dog and leave the house,
Yeah.
5 minutes, take a
Yeah.
minute, let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Later, we can come back at that and then we can say, what was going on? Because you were really struggling. But if we
Mm-hmm.
just jump in and if we jump in and try and fix it, try and stop it, try and correct it, we just add more stress and make it worse. Sometimes
Yeah.
once they're in behaviour, there's really not a lot you can do. It's too late.
Mm.
You know, it's all
Yeah.
the stuff that we
Yeah.
do before it and all the repair that we do after it that's really going to make the change in the long run. But as
Mm-hmm.
long as we're just managing behaviour, nothing's really going to change. It's just going to escalate. So I would be making
Yeah.
lots of connections and working. Sometimes teenagers, people will say, my teenagers won't do it. My teenagers won't breathe. They won't talk about their emotions. They won't, do all this stuff. But really, it's not about them. It's about us. This is
Mm-hmm.
I think, the hardest
Yeah.
piece to get our head around. How can it just be? It's not me. I was very much them. They're the problem
Mm-hmm.
until I learned that was my stress was a big factor because they're
Yeah.
feeding off of us as well. The minute we get stressed, they get stressed.
Mm.
And that's
Definitely.
also
Yeah.
seeing that your teenager is actually just a triggered child in that moment because we regress when we're stressed out. And so
Mm.
they're probably regress back to a much younger age. We're talking to them, lecturing them, nagging them, and they're hearing nothing because their brain is offline and they're just triggered little 5-year-olds or 2-year-olds or whatever age their worst moments were. And it's stop talking, stop talking. We're adding so much stress,
Yeah.
with all the
Yeah.
things we're doing and saying.
Mm.
To walk away, breathe, come back when it's calm.
Yeah. No,
It's
that
key.
makes so much sense. Yeah. 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 No,
It
it
almost
really
sounds too
works. Like, yeah.
simple, doesn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, but it
Mm.
really does make a
Yeah.
difference.
Because you mentioned as well in the book the ACEs as well. Do you want to touch on that because that's really interesting. The surveys that were
Yeah,
done.
yeah, huge part of it, isn't it? That's what it all started for me when
Yeah.
I learned about adverse childhood experiences. In Scotland
Yeah.
here, we're really lucky. There's a huge movement going on in Scotland, and it's really making change called ACE Aware Nation. And so basically, two men years ago, and I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but two men in America, two neuroscientists, set out to do a study on obesity because they believed that obesity wasn't about trauma, that it was about, sorry, it wasn't about food, it was about trauma. And they believed people could lose weight, but that they couldn't keep the weight off. It would always go back on most of the time because they would get triggered back into that trauma. And so they did this huge study. They wanted to learn more about the trauma that people had experienced. And they asked 17,500 people, which is a big study. And they
Mm.
asked them, out of these 10 ACEs, what have you experienced? Now, let's see if I can remember these 10 off the top of my head. So there is physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, living in a home where someone is treated violently, living with someone who's been in trouble with the law or in prison, living with somebody with any kind of abuse, substance abuse or addiction, not being with both of your parents of origin, and I think being in the foster care system. I think I've missed one. I'm sure there is another one. I can't remember what it is. It was 10
Yeah.
ACEs. So
Hmm.
when it was anonymous, it was just a number in a box. And when the results came back, they were shocked at what they saw, high numbers. And basically, what these two men discovered after they've done this study many, many times was that many of us have suffered these adversities in our childhood and that we don't talk about it. And
Mm.
then on top of that, years later, like Nadine Burke-Harris, who's a wonderful lady to listen to, she did her own study. As a doctor, she started to see a pattern of illness and disease and behaviors with the patients that she was working with in Miami, a
Hmm.
specific area of Miami. And she fell upon this work and took it further and made her own, did her own study. And what she discovered is that having four or more of these ACEs can have an impact in our adult lives. Not always, but it can. We can end up with things, all of our mental health problems, all of our physical health problems. A lot of them can come from having high ACEs, and even an earlier death can sometimes be a factor if we've had high ACEs as a
Mm.
child. And so learning that, and I could see that in my own history and in my own, with all my foster children, I could see it playing out, see how many of the illnesses and the diseases that are creating them because we're not allowing ourselves to release our emotion. We hide it and we
Hmm.
push it down. So we've been taught to do, and so it festers inside of us, and we hold on to it for years, and it becomes disease, and then it can become behavior. So behavior comes from all these unexpressed emotions.
Hmm.
And so if we can learn how to just have emotion and allow emotion, validate and acknowledge and release emotion, then it doesn't always turn into behavior and illness. And so that's a real huge piece of what we teach. But we have to start with that, doing it ourselves so that we can then model that to the children that we're living with.
Yeah. Suzanne,
It's a
thanks very
hard
much for
one.
sharing that. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard because we've all been taught not to
Mm,
have emotion.
yeah.
What was it we were
And
told as kids?
mm,
Straighten your face, change your attitude, they'll give you something to cry
yeah.
about.
Children should be heard, seen and not heard, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know how lucky you are. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
didn't know.
Mm,
It's not our fault.
mm, no. And you were saying as
It
well
is.
in
There's
the
so
book
much to
that
learn on the
yeah,
neuroscience that we now have.
yeah, definitely. And you were saying what's his name? John, I forget his surname, is doing a lot of work in the schools in Scotland as
John
well, isn't he?
Carnican.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, John Carnican's done some amazing work in Glasgow and Scotland. So John Carnican was a big tough police detective. I worked for
Mm,
Strathclyde Police back in the day, and he was given the job of handling our knife crime. And it was John Carnican and a lady called Karen McCluskey who did it. They were given the job of reducing our knife crime problem. Our knife crime problem back in the late 80s, early 90s was higher than anywhere in Europe.
mm,
And that was in Glasgow. And they more than halved that when they discovered that they needed to get into homes and build relationships with kids. The kids were these kids that were carrying knives were coming from trauma. They were coming from hard places, generational patterns of trauma. And they
mm,
were going out on a night out. They had no regulation skills. They had a knife in their pocket because everyone else had a knife. They were scared. The brain shut down when something kicked off. They couldn't remember, they couldn't think. They just were in fear and survival. The knives were out, and it was too late. And he
mm,
talks a lot about reducing the school to prison pipeline. There's a lot of great work on how prison wasn't making any difference. It wasn't stopping it happening
mm,
because they weren't
mhm.
stopping to think about that in fear. They're not choosing it. They don't think, oh, well, I might go to jail if I do this. The brain just shuts down. The knife was out and it was too late. And so if we can
Yeah.
teach the regulation skills, then they have some capacity to stop and think about what they're doing. And we can, teach them how to do that eventually if we keep doing it ourselves. But yeah, he's
It's a
really
real
powerful to listen
snowball.
to. He's got lots of
Yeah.
podcasts. He's done lots of incredible,
Mm.
yeah,
So we real
yeah. He's done
snowball
some amazing
effect
work.
kind
He
of thing.
talks about just in,
Yeah. Mm,
oh yeah, his work's really what started the
mm,
movement in
mm.
Glasgow, and started that chain reaction of all the ACEs stuff and all the work that's going on in Scotland now.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Wow, that's really good. Yeah.
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 I've seen him. I've
Absolutely.
seen him talk a few times. I'm very lucky. Yeah, he's amazing.
Mm. And Suzanne, can I just ask you for people that are watching and listening, how can people find out more and get in touch with your workshop and for pe people that are watching this now?
Yeah, sure. Well, anyone can join our Facebook group. So if they're on
Yeah.
Facebook, tip Trauma
Yeah.
Informed Parenting. We have a page, we have a group, we have a main group for anyone. Anyone can join it. It's a private group, so people can, comment and chat, and nobody else sees what they're writing. They can sign up to any of our online workshops. They are fully funded. And we do one once a
Mm.
month. It's fully funded for anybody to attend. I think you were at the last one, Mark, weren't
Yeah,
you?
was that the last one, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a trauma coach on the call with us because some people can get a bit triggered. It can be hard. Take a minute. It helps them calm, feel safe. They're on Eventbrite, but they're also shared on our website, Tip Trauma Informed Parenting, and on the Facebook group. And we've all sorts of exciting things happening now. We've got the book that's now got the content of the workshop, and we are offering 6-week book studies on the book, the Learning Circle. So our trauma coach will guide parents through 6 weeks of reading the book, coming back every week and talking about what they're learning and what they're seeing and what they're doing at home and how it's changing and how it's working and how it's not working. And she's amazing. She was so excited when she did the first one just recently, how well it went, the difference that people saw. And so we're just growing it and developing it and doing more stuff with it. So you can buy the book on Amazon. It's Trauma Informed Parenting in Action, and you can attend a workshop. We'll also deliver a workshop to any organisation across the UK, fully funded, online or in person if it's not too far away. So reach out and ask me. You never know, I might be able to travel and deliver an in-person one.
Wow, that's great. I love that idea you just mentioned there about looking at reading chapters of the book and seeing how it's working. That's an amazing idea, isn't it?
Yeah, and then having that
Yeah,
place to
yeah.
come back to every week with people that are doing it
Mm,
with you, and having the trauma coach there and able to guide people through that, because it brings up some stuff, it's our stuff that comes up. And it's when we do
mm.
that healing that we start to change, and then that's where we see the real change in our homes.
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. No, I can't thank you enough, Suzanne, for coming on the podcast. It's absolutely amazing. And if you wouldn't mind sharing the links as well, I
Yeah,
can put them in the show notes as well, please. That'd be
yeah,
really
send
helpful
them
for
on.
everybody.
Brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
yeah. Thank you. So, thanks again, and best luck with all your brilliant work you do, and for
Thank
bringing
you.
it out to the world. You're so kind. Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for watching and listening watching on YouTube and listening on Spotify. So join me again for another podcast next week, and make sure you check out all Suzanne's work, and her book is amazing. Definitely get that. Okay, thanks again, Suzanne, and best of luck with everything. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stop this now.
Bye.